everybody, welcome back to the channel. Can you believe it? It's already the end of 2024. What an amazing year it's been. I've got so much to be grateful for from this past year, and first and foremost, you guys out there watching are a big part of it. This YouTube channel has gone through a period of amazing growth over the last year, starting with a milestone in early 2024, hitting 1,000 subscribers, and just recently, in the past couple of weeks, also eclipsing the 2,000 subscriber mark. So first and foremost, a big thank you to everybody that's watching, everybody that subscribed, and everybody that supported me throughout the past year. Now, on top of the amazing growth the YouTube channel has had over the last year, I've also had the opportunity to make a lot more friends both online and in person through events like the Lakeshores 24 Northeast Regional Convention and through the Op Around the Clock, where I had operators from all over the Northeast here at my layout. The layout itself has now been through 10 total operating sessions this year, and each one has made it better than the last. I really appreciate all of the operators that I've had at the layout for giving me such valuable feedback and allowing me to continue to improve the layout as it stands today. Now, not only have operations improved on this layout, but I've improved as a modeler myself as well over the course of the year. I've learned a lot from those around me, both in person and online, about scenery, about structure building, about just ways to become a better modeler. And I'm also incredibly grateful for those people as well. It's because of those people that things have progressed so wonderfully here on the layout, and we're now ready for the 2024 version of the layout tour. So we'll get into that in just a second. But before we do, I just wanted to make sure to let you all know to stick around until the end of the video. At the end of the video, not only will we be discussing the expectations for the layout in 2025 and for me as a modeler in 2025, but we'll also be giving away this boxcar. I figured what better way to give back to the community that's helped me so much and that I'm so grateful for than by giving away a something for free. So this boxcar is on its way to me right now, and as soon as I have it, and as soon as this video goes live, we'll be giving it away. But you got to stay tuned to the end of the video in order to figure out how to enter. But without further ado, let's hop into this layout tour and head over to Geneva Yard. So, existing subscribers that have been with me a while, you're going to have to bear with me a little bit today. When I do these layout tour videos, I like to make them as if I'm taking somebody who's never been to the layout in real life around on a tour for the very first time. And when I take somebody on a tour for the very first time, the place that we start is the yard here in Geneva. Geneva is the hub of all of the operations here on the Finger Lakes. We have pretty much every single job, with the exception of one, interacts with Geneva Yard, and all but 3 originate here, hence the large amount of power that we have on the engine tracks. Now, as far as jobs originating here, there is one job that originates eastbound, that is Trangias 2, which ends up in Auburn, New York, and then we have multiple that originate westbound as well. You can see down there at the end of the yard we have a turnout and a diverging route that goes off to the left, and one that goes straight to the west wall of the basement. That turnout is considered to be control point CP Gene, and the diverging route that goes out onto the peninsula is the former New York Central Auburn Road, which goes all of the way to Canandaigua, and the straight through route of that turnout is the Norfolk Southern Corning Secondary, which heads south in real life to the town of Gang Mills. Along that back wall, we have a connection point, which is considered to be Himrod Junction. Himrod Junction is where Finger Lakes trackage begins, goes down a steep grade into the yard at Himrod, New York, and then goes north along the peninsula back under the Norfolk Southern Corning Secondary and ends up in the town of Penn Yan. But we'll get to those later as we continue the tour. For now, let's talk a little bit about Geneva Yard. Geneva Yard has gone through a couple of big changes over the course of the past year. Most notably, all of the backdrops here are done. These are actual photos taken in the town of Geneva. And the yard itself has gone through a big transformation as well. You'll recall in September of this year, we made a big video about changing a whole bunch of stuff on this layout prior to the Lake Shores 24 convention. Geneva Yard was part of those changes. I had Woodland Scenic's ballast down in the yard. I was not happy with it. It would not sit properly. It kept floating, kept coming loose when I was cleaning track and getting jammed in all of the switch points. So finally, in early September of this year, I decided it was time to rip out all of that Woodland Scenic's ballast and replace it all with Scenic Express. And I'm really, really happy with how that turned out. I think that the yard looks way, way, way more realistic as it does right now, using a mix of different sizes of Scenic Express ballast and a mix of different colors. Actually, there is a little bit of Arizona rock and mineral mixed in on the main line to help delineate the main line from the yard as well. And I also took a look at the prototype Geneva Yard and started to gain a better understanding of the prototype capacity at Geneva Yard and how my version of Geneva Yard stacked up to it. Now, I run my Finger Lakes Railway trains at about 40% of the car length of the real Finger Lakes Railway trains. I just don't have the space to do much more than that. So it makes sense that the yard here needed to be about 40% of the capacity of the real Geneva Yard. But it turned out that unfortunately my capacity was only about 30%, even though I had the exact same footprint, the exact same number of yard tracks as the real Geneva Yard. So with that in mind, when I also ripped out the ballast, I decided I was going to add another track here all the way to the left, which is a stub end track, and increase the capacity of Geneva Yard here. This gets me to the 40% that I was looking for, which I'm happy about. And it's actually prototypically justifiable. I do have an extra yard track now, but the real Geneva Yard does have a stub end track that's accessible from the east end. So I now have that replicated pretty well here. And it also encourages my operators to switch everything when they're on the Geneva Yard job from the east end, which is the less busy end of the yard and where I want them normally to be switching from in order to ensure that the west end stays less congested, where there's multiple trains coming in and out every day. Alright, I'd say that's just about enough time spent talking about the yard. Why don't we get out on the road, shall we? So, just east of Geneva Yard, we come directly into a very notable scene on the prototype Finger Lakes Railway, and that is the Kuga Causeway. It's a very large man-made landform straight across the north point of Cayuga Lake, another one of the Finger Lakes that the Finger Lakes Railway is named for, of course. And you'll see here, my Kuga Causeway is not done quite yet, but we've got a good portion of things well underway. We've got the backdrop up here. We've got, as you can see, you can tell that this is a lake crossing. There's cottages there in the background of the backdrop. We've got the Bizzuto Boat Works in the backdrop as well, right behind the causeway, and things look pretty good here. But definitely, this is an area in 2025 where I hope to progress a little bit further. I'm getting a little bit tired of just looking at plywood benchwork over here and not a gorgeous lake scene. Now, full disclosure, if I had to say there was anything I feel is a weak point on my model railroad, it is the distance between towns here on the east side of the railroad.
because right after you get out of the Kuga Causeway, you're immediately right into the town of Auburn. On the prototype, you pass 3 to 4 different towns, I believe it is, between the Geneva Yard East End and Auburn, but for us, it's just this one short scene here, the Kuga Causeway. So maybe if there's ever a Finger Lakes Railway 2.0 in my future, this will be something that I'll think about. Adding a little bit more mainline run, especially on the east side of the layout for sure. But as we get into the Auburn side of the railroad, there's a lot that's changed here as well. A lot of it is actually very, very recent though. This is an area where I've been focusing a lot of my effort in the last couple of months. So one of the big changes here, and more notable ones, is the addition of the Solvay sweep track, which is this back track here that you'll see. Now originally my track plan called for extending the benchwork all the way along this eastward wall and into another staging yard, which I was going to use as Solvay staging. I played around with a bunch of different ideas to get that to work, including having the West Rock plant that's in Solvay, which is actually technically the Finger Lakes' largest customer. But unfortunately, it's just not, it doesn't feel right. I don't want to go over top of my workbench. I don't want to relocate my workbench. And ultimately, I'm just going to start running out of space to store things down here if I go any further, unfortunately. So ultimately, this decision has been made to nix the line all the way to Solvay and instead model it kind of in the old school way that Finger Lakes used to run things to and from Solvay. Before the invention of GS2, the Finger Lakes used to run 2 separate jobs that met in Auburn and swapped cars there, and those are called sweep jobs normally. So, thus, the Solvay sweep track has been born. What was once going to be the main to Solvay is now a sweep track where I can model traffic that's coming from further east on the actual prototype and onto my layout for interchange with Norfolk Southern or to go directly to customers as well. In addition to the sweep track here in Auburn, we also have 2 separate industries and a yard. The first industry we have here is at Auburn Metal Processing. This is just a scrap recycler in Auburn. They actually, from what I've seen, actually recycle freight cars here. They'll tear those down and send them out in scrap gons. And then you also have Auburn Yard here as well. Auburn Yard is a useful destination on the layout because it allows me to model a lot of the traffic that goes in and out of Auburn without actually modeling the industries. The 2 bays that are sitting here are actually for Owens, Illinois, a customer that gets 2 bays full of silicate, I believe, for glass manufacturing. And then if you turn a little bit further to the right here, you'll also see the main customer in Auburn, which is Nucor Steel. This is a manufacturer of rebar of different sizes, and I've modeled it as a foreground industry here, even though technically if you watch the last layout update, it's in the backdrop scene behind this very iconic brick building that's in the backdrop. Nucor really is a very interesting facility to model, and I'm hoping to be able to do a lot with just that little amount of space that I have over here. Thankfully, rebar doesn't really take up a lot of space, and either do gantry cranes, and that's a lot of what's going on in that little spur. But one of the things I've had fun doing for Nucor was creating prototype rolling stock for the facility. These are some custom-made gondolas. I have, I think, 5 or 6 of these now. This is actually my very first attempt at custom replicating detailed graffiti, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But these are pretty special cars. These had, these ribbing actually all the way down to the ends here, and I had to file those down. And then the bulkheads that are on either end are actually 3D printed parts from Shapeways, which I installed and had to kind of match the paint as best I could. The decals that are on these are a custom-made decal from my buddy Jim via Highball Graphics, and then I've also modeled some prototype loads as well using tag wire, which is a wire that comes in like 3-foot increments, and it's all straight, so you don't have to worry about doing anything to straighten it out, and just a little bit of basswood for the spacers between each level of rebar. But these were a really fun project to work on throughout this past year, and I'm glad that they're done because it really helps to bring some realism into an industry that's not quite done yet, so you know what's going on despite that fact. Alright, so moving on to where the action really happens on this railroad, the west end of the yard. Like I said, there is a lot of traffic that comes in and out this side. That's why I like to have the Geneva Yard job drill from the other side of the yard, and really it's just the GS2 job that comes out in and out that way for road trains. But as you can see, we're back here at CPG, and let's take a look at the peninsula itself. Again, this is the Auburn Road, and it's the west end of the Auburn Road that terminates in Canandaigua, New York. But the first thing that we get to here is something that I like to call the Geneva Industrial Complex. There's a series of 3 different customers here. All of them actually exist in the prototype, and all of them take a different commodity. So it's a pretty interesting little switch job for the second yard job out of Geneva, and we'll dive into the customers here next. So the first customer that you come to here in the Geneva Industrial Complex is the OBE Team Track. The big commodity that comes in and out of the Team Track is center beams full of lumber. In the era that I model, that is actually what came in and out of this track a lot. In more recent times, this has kind of been converted to be more of a potable water team track where they load and unload water. As we move further to the right, you'll see another stub end track here that comes in from a diamond and off of the industrial siding. This is Seneca Foods. Seneca Foods on the prototype is a big warehouse where they do a ton of packaging, so they get a lot of packaging material in by rail in various different boxcars, but most notably the boxcars that come in here are Wisconsin Central, Wisconsin Southern, and this HS reporting mark I've seen a few times as well. Interestingly, I have also seen in real life the Sargento cheese car, which is a WSOR car, and the breast cancer awareness car come in and out of here. So, of course, naturally, I do have them modeled in my pool for Seneca Foods as well. But this is an interesting industry. I'll try to throw up some prototype photos of it that I took this fall. It's got this big lean-to out front where all of the cars sit inside it, and sometimes this siding can be absolutely chocked full of cars when things are busy at Seneca Foods. But for me, it'll be kind of a 4-car at a time sort of industry, a couple of respots here and there in my op scheme, and this is definitely one place where that makes a little bit of sense to do. It'll be interesting to try to model that little lean-to. I think what I'm going to try to do is make it like 3 cars long so that there's still an accessible area of reach for the engineer/conductor on this Geneva Yard job to connect to the front boxcar without having to look inside the industry or anything like that. But should be an interesting scene once it's modeled nonetheless. And as we move to the right once more to the final industry on the Geneva Industrial Complex siding, this is the Andersons. The Andersons is a grain loadout that in real life is absolutely massive at this point. The Andersons, after my modeling era, was actually bought out by DeLong, which is another industry that I have modeled elsewhere on the Auburn Road. But this particular industry in modern times in Geneva has a bunch of absolutely massive grain bins that are shockingly large for central New York. You wouldn't expect that big of a facility to be located here. It kind of feels more like it's in the Midwest than it is the Finger Lakes region for sure. So you might also remember that in early September, we ripped out a bunch of track here on the Geneva Industrial Complex side of the peninsula, and that was to make sure that we got the ops scheme working the exact way that we wanted it to, and to improve the reliability of the track work itself. I won't get into too much detail on that because I've talked about it now in 2 different videos. The 5 tips for reliable operations video, or 5 things I've learned video, and the video where I tore out the track itself. But ultimately, now this orientation of track has been through 3 different op sessions, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out so far. It's been far, far, far more reliable than the other orientation was. The op scheme has benefited from it. No longer do we have to worry about GC2 and GY2 having any sort of issues or anything like that at all. Everything just runs smoothly, and I don't have to stress about it. But as we take the turn out here on to the rest of the peninsula, we come to the area known as Phelps Junction. Phelps Junction is a single siding, which is actually a more northern portion of the Pennsylvania Railroad line that also runs through Penn Yan. Between the 2 areas, it's been ripped out, and the little short section here at Phelps Junction is served off the former New York Central right-of-way, of course. But there's actually 2 different customers on the siding itself. The first one is Shepherd Grain, which will be a nice little surge bin with a loadout chute for both trucks and rail. And the second industry is going to be Phelps Supply, which is a fertilizer dealer towards the back of that siding. The prototype siding at Phelps Supply actually has a runaround, but unfortunately, just due to the space constraints, we just don't have the space to do that on this layout. So this will be a trailing point served industry on the return trip from Canandaigua. So as we continue our trek further west here on the Auburn Road, we now get to the town of Clifton Springs. Now, Clifton Springs is an interesting area for my layout in particular because it actually provides me with the largest amount of depth that I'll ever have in a scene on this layout. At its widest point here from the front to the backdrop is actually 4 feet. Which means that I'm going to have some fun to really play around with a really nice little small town scene here. I plan on modeling a lot of the buildings around DeLong, Clifton Springs, which is a grain supplier, again, as I've mentioned previously. I'm going to have the chance to model a lot of the buildings in town and around the industry itself in some pretty accurate scale, which should be pretty interesting. I'm excited for that prospect. There's a couple of really interesting buildings right near the tracks, including the New York Central Station, which is now a library, and the Freight House as well, which is very well preserved by, I believe, a historical society. And there's a building there called Finger Lakes Ambulance, which is right next to the tracks. It's a pretty interesting structure, and the kits that Joey from Late Night Hobbies makes actually are pretty close to what I would need in order to build that building. So it should be pretty interesting to kind of have like a first responder emergency vehicle EMS sort of scene right in the foreground there. Should be interesting. There's a very large radio tower on that building, which should be fun to model. It'll be cool to have some ambulances and police cars and stuff, kind of stationed there as well. So as we round the bend out of Clifton Springs, we begin to come into the town of Canandaigua. The Canandaigua side of the layout will span this entire backside of the peninsula. I decided to dedicate a lot of space to Canandaigua itself. It's a really neat town, and there's a lot to model. And most notably, where the train is traversing right now will end up being a pretty cool scene where the Finger Lakes tracks actually go right through the parking lot of the city court building. The church there that I have out front is just a stand-in for now. It's actually not that far off from the building that's there. The building that's there is a brick building with that sort of steeple design. Just needs to get rid of the point, as the steeple on the courthouse building is actually just a rounded one. And it's a different color as well, of course, but that's okay. We'll get that painted eventually. As we move past the courthouse, though, you'll see that we start a very long runaround siding, and that's just because we needed a lot of space to be able to run around the amount of cars that are coming out of Pactiv, which is the biggest industry on my layout in terms of carloads. But funny enough, it's actually the one that takes up the least amount of space. And if I had a second regret for the layout, that's probably it, but it's okay. Pactiv is a plastic pellet facility. They do a bunch of injection molding at Pactiv, and I took my drone out this past fall and took it out over Pactiv and realized, holy cow, I am just not doing this facility justice. There is tracks just about everywhere in there. There are so many different unloading spots, spots that spot different types of plastic pellets in there. And this little area here with just 3 yard tracks operationally is a lot of fun, but it really does not match the prototype at all. The idea behind what I'm doing here is because this is a customer with such heavy volume, I've got an unloading track here and I've got 2 overflow tracks. So typically an operator, when they come in here, will be bringing in 2 fresh cars and moving 2 cars off of the overflow tracks onto the unloading track and taking the 2 empties off the unloading track back with them. And just to the east of Pactiv, we come to the other industry that's in Canandaigua, and that is Canandaigua Wine. Canandaigua Wine is what it sounds like. It's a distributor of wine products, and they get corn syrup in by rail to be used in the packaging, preserving process in some way, shape, or form. But it's a pretty interesting sighting nonetheless. Same thing as Pactiv. When I took the drone out over Canandaigua Wine, I was really shocked to see how complex the facility really is. The siding itself is relatively accurate. It's just a single siding. It is double-ended in real life so that they can work it depending on if they're going to Pactiv or returning from Pactiv, and don't have to worry about doing it specifically at one time on the prototype. But you know, there's only so much that we can do space-wise on the HO scale version. So it's a stub end track that's a trailing point for the return kick. All right, so that's about it as far as the Canandaigua Peninsula is concerned. Let's now head out on the other side of the CPG and switch and out onto the Corning secondary. Now, remember how I said I really wished I had more space for a mainline run on the Auburn side of the layout? Well, I did manage to make sure that I had a really good space dedicated to a mainline run on the Corning secondary side of the layout. And boy, am I ever happy that I do, because in my opinion, the Seneca Lake scene here on the Corning secondary has genuinely turned into the crown jewel of this layout as far as scenes are concerned. You'll recall earlier this year, I worked pretty hard on getting this scene put together. Again, this is Seneca Lake that's in the foreground, and then we've got the embankment running up to the Corning secondary, and where the train is now, it's just gone over the Himrod junction switch and is now going to traverse the overpass and head into Gang Mills Yard. On the diverging route of that line, it actually goes downhill and into Himrod Yard underneath the overpass. That switch we call Himrod Junction, as I mentioned earlier in the video. I'd be remiss if I didn't spend just a little bit of time here just enjoying the scenery in this video. It did take me quite a while to get the photo backdrops, the hillside, and all of this detailed scenery in. It took me a couple of different tries to get the ballast to look the way it does on this steep embankment, along with all of the different vegetation as well. But overall, I'm ecstatic with how it turned out. The lake itself, which is the boomer method, looks really, really good, despite me messing it up twice, I believe, before I finally got it right. So yeah, third time's the charm. So as we swing around here to the Himrod side of the layout, you can see we've got a lot to talk about over here as well. This is another area where I am super happy with how the backdrops turned out. You really get a flair for what the Himrod side of things looks like in real life with the salt mines and the Mennonite farm in the background. And after reworking a bunch of the ballast here and starting in on scenery, you're really starting to get a feel for what it's like in the real Himrod. But that's not the only thing that's interesting here in Himrod. We also have a big milestone project here in the form of a locomotive. This is Finger Lakes Locomotive 2201, which I introduced to you all in an earlier layout update this year. But it is the very first custom painted locomotive that I've ever completed, which is a very big milestone, not just for the layout roster, but also for me as a modeler as I grow and as I learn and as I hope that I'm inspiring other people to push the limits of what they're willing and capable of doing as model railroaders as well. So as we've now rounded the bend here and ended up in Gang Mills Yard, you'll see there's not a lot that's changed here since the last project update, other than these beautiful backdrops, which I just recently completed and detailed in one of my more recent layout update videos. We've got a little bit of hill work going on down at the end of this peninsula, and we'll get some trees on that eventually as soon as I've got time. I've got all of the base scenery down in order to do that. It's just a matter of now having the time to go back and build all those trees to fill in that hillside, and then what a wonderful view break that'll make for trains coming in and out of Gang Mills Yard for sure. So we now find ourselves back where it all started, in the beautiful town of Penn Yan, New York. This is the northbound run out of Himrod Yard, and it's a scene that looks pretty significantly different than it did just a year ago, and that's because in the month of January, I spent about 80 total hours working on this vineyard scene here in the foreground. There's about 150 total scratch-built vines in this little area of the vineyard, and boy, am I happy with how these turned out. Had the opportunity to even do a clinic at the Lakeshores 24 convention on how I did them, which I thoroughly enjoyed as well, and hopefully it's encouraged a lot more people to start creating vineyards. As we pass the vineyard and now get into downtown Penn Yan proper, we see the last few industries on the layout. There's 3 of them here in Penn Yan. The first one is Lakeview Organics, which is this elevator here in the foreground. Unfortunately, in sad news for 2024, this prototype industry actually closed down. The family that ran it retired, so at least it's a happy ending. They retired, they went out on their own terms, and they just no longer needed to run the business in order to, provide for themselves. So the industry is now officially shuttered. Eventually, I do plan to replace this Walther's elevator with a more prototypical structure that's more reminiscent of the one that's in place there. But for now, it does the job. It's a pretty interesting industry because even though the industry is right here on the main line, they actually unload on the siding here where that Illinois Central Golf car is, and kind of just do what they need to across the main line, since it's not really the busiest one in the world, that's for sure. They only go up to Penn Yan about once a week on the prototype. Behind Lakeview Organics is Burkett Mills. Burkett Mills is a little bit busier of a customer for the Finger Lakes. They ship and receive buckwheat out of this facility, and they get a lot of various 4650, 4750 covered hoppers in and out of there in order to get that job done. So as we officially get to the northernmost terminus of this railroad, you'll see our final customer on the layout tour, which is Silan Plastics. Silan Plastics is a pretty interesting location in real life. The actual industry siding is probably, I don't know, I would probably estimate it's a good half-mile back in the woods from the actual prototype building where their manufacturing facility is. Silan Plastics, of course, is another injection molding facility, and they have this unloading track, again, way back in the woods, and have this really long vacuum line that runs from a little shack down here at the unloading area, back through the woods, up a hill, and then into the big, large building that's I've got modeled in the backdrop. You can actually even see the vacuum line running in the backdrop itself as well, and then goes up into these two tanks in the background to store the plastic pellets that they need in order to get things done at the facility there. But it's a really interesting location to model because really the only thing that's happening on the layout itself is a little bit of fall protection and the vacuum lines, and the whole industry itself is actually in the backdrop, which is pretty cool. It just goes to show that with a limited amount of space, you can still really portray a decent amount of realism for an industry like this.
So here ends the layout tour. I'm so glad that you guys stuck around and took a full walk around the layout with me. I hope that you enjoyed it. For those of you that are existing, or should I say, long-time viewers of the channel, I hope that it was really neat to see the amount of progress that's gone on in the last year. If you go back and look at the 2023 layout tour, this layout looks completely different now compared to what it did. And it's so nice to just take a little bit of time to think about how much we've done in just one short year here on the Finger Lakes Railway layout. And again, it just makes me thankful for all of you out there watching, for all of you out there helping to make me a better model railroader. I can't thank you all enough. As far as what's to come in the future in 2025, well, a little bit of that is still up in the air. We'll see what happens with this layout in 2025. For the first 6 months of the year, I really need to be focused on the Fremo layout itself. We have a hard deadline for that Fremo layout of July next year. We were, as a club, as the Genesee Society of Model Engineers, asked to set up a display at the Genesee County Fair in July. So I really need to make sure that I'm focused on getting those modules as far along as possible in the next 6 months, which might mean that we're sacrificing just a little bit of time spent on this layout. I still hope to be operating it somewhat regularly, and nothing's really going to change, but for the time being, we are genuinely starting over on that Fremo layout, and really need to spend some time focusing on that. So I hope that the Fremo side of things is something that's interesting to all of you viewers out there, because it is something we're going to spend a lot of time on. Now, as far as the giveaway is concerned, it's really simple. All that you need to do in order to enter the giveaway is make sure that you're subscribed to the channel first and foremost, I know a lot of you probably already are, so no problem there. If you're new to the channel but still want to enter the giveaway, that's totally fine as well. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you are qualified in that regard. And then the second thing, just leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about this layout tour video. Let me know if you have any suggestions as to what can be done better, or just let me know your favorite locomotive, anything like that. Any comment will count towards this giveaway. As soon as this video's been out for 2 weeks, I'm going to go back down to that comment section, assign numbers to each of the comments from oldest to newest, and go to a random number generator, have it select a number, and whoever's comment is correlated with the number that's selected will be the winner of the boxcar. I'll reply to your comment at that point and try to get in touch with you in order to get the boxcar shipped to you free of charge for anybody that's in the domestic United States, possibly even Canada. If you are international, I may need to ask you to help with the shipping costs if it's going to be too costly. I will pick up the shipping cost if it's reasonable, but if it's going to be an exorbitant amount, we might need to have some discussions, but I'm still willing to get the car shipped to you. That's no problem at all. So again, thank you guys all so much for watching. I really appreciate every single one of you. I hope that you enjoyed today's layout tour, and I hope that you'll stick around for future videos as well. We've got a lot of exciting things coming with that Fremo layout. That'll be all documented on this channel without a doubt. And then once we're through with that, we can start to focus again on the Finger Lakes Railway layout here and push forward with more progress there. So stick around, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.